Well, good morning, everyone. Hope you're having a good morning so far, and I'm actually quite excited for the panel we got ahead of us. So before I ask my panelists to introduce themselves, I'll just provide a little bit of context to this panel session. So in my opinion, we are standing at the most significant crossroads for the UK rail networks in a generation. The industry is moving away from a traditionally fragmented operated railways towards a single guiding mind as we transition towards Great British Railways and the rollout of the Railways Bill. Since the pandemic, the UK rail is not just recovering, it's actually accelerating. Passenger numbers have now surged back to pre-pandemic levels, and demand is projected to go up to by 50% by 2050, and freight to rise by 75%. In view of all of this, we cannot rely on incremental change anymore. The tracks of tomorrow are essentially being laid at the intersection of national scale and local devolution. The challenge we face is a fine balancing act. To make rail work for the future, we need national scale for efficiency and technology. But we also need local devolution to ensure the railway actually serves the local societal needs. The opportunity in front of us is a network that thinks nationally, acts locally, and innovates relentlessly. If we use this moment well, we won't just improve railways, we will create more connected, greener, smarter mobility systems for the whole country, which will fuel productivity. To talk it through more, I would like my panel to introduce themselves, and we'll start with some questions.
Thank you. Good start. Morning, everyone. I'm Fiona Took. I am Director at Metro Dynamics, where I lead the Sectors Clusters Innovation team.
Morning, everybody. Goswell, Transport Operations Director at Wordline. A little interesting fact when you talk about innovation and devolution, back in 2011, 2012, I worked for Network Rail when we first started talking about devolution and innovation and how do we join things up. We're still here. Let's see if we can get it right.
Hi, everybody. I'm Helen Davis. I'm responsible for strategy, business development, and digitalisation at Siemens Mobility Rail Infrastructure.
And good morning. I'm Ross Welham. I wear a few hats, one of which is on the screen, which is I'm the sort of lead research and innovation manager for LNER, but I also lead the what we call Future Labs, which is the DFTO, so train operator-backed innovation program, where we work with startups, SMEs, and provide opportunities for companies that maybe are new to rail and help them navigate and provide some funding as well, which is always good.
Right, Helen, if you could start with yourselves. Anybody tuning into this conversation for the first time or new to the topic, why does rail reform and devolution matters now? What's the burning platform?
I think there's a lot of answers to that question, but let's start with the fact that everything is changing around us at the moment. We have got an operating model that is based upon a pre-pandemic world. Passenger demands, whilst the volumes might be back up to pre-pandemic numbers, the pattern is very different, and passengers are expecting different things. They can have a choice now as to whether to work from home or whether to travel into an office, and so therefore travel has to be a hell of a lot easier, cost-effective, and reliable. But the other key element for me is technological advancement. And I think, for me, those two things together mean that we need to do something different. Therefore, rail reform is important.
So building upon that, where do you see the biggest new opportunity that reform could open up that wasn't possible before?
From my perspective, it's about whole system thinking. It's actually about looking at the whole transport system and how rail integrates into that. Obviously, we're here to talk about devolution as part of rail reform. And obviously, if we don't look at that whole system integration, then we're just going to look still at those separate industries operating separately. For me, there are some really big things that need to be addressed, one of which is the huge cost of operating the railway at the moment. And again, going back to my technology point, There are technologies here today that can be implemented to drive significant cost reduction, and I really hope that rail reform will lead that.
Coming to you, Fiona. If devolution is to succeed, what are the risks, watch out, we should keep an eye on? But more importantly, how can we avoid them?
So building on the point about the whole system thinking, I think for me there are three key watch-outs in terms of devolution. I think the first one is that we often, the royal we, can over-focus on passenger movement at the expense of freight and keeping industry moving. In most places where we're working, we find that freight and logistics tends to fall down the cracks between transport team or a planning team or the economic development team, and therefore it becomes a problem, something to fix or resolve. We focus on congestion or on emissions, rather than thinking about where is this a huge opportunity for us to drive productivity in our place and move things around. It's a really core economic opportunity, so we have to make sure if we're going to succeed, we see that. The second is fragmentation, so that the rail is inherently a national system. So, and local priorities are really important, but if we go too far, then are we creating a strong national framework, but we lose coherence because it breaks down into regional places? And then finally, on again linking to Helen's point, innovation not scaling. I think that's a huge risk and a huge watch out. It's already tricky enough to pull through in the system. So if we're going to really think about making this work, we have to make sure that we're not making that harder. The panel before talked about risk appetites and how important risk appetite was, and I think there's a bit of a risk there that the risk appetite gets smaller if we think about this at too small a level. So success is keeping that national coherence, but letting or enabling devolution to do what it does best, which is to align with the opportunities that are around there and continue to pull that through.
We'll come on to the balance question later on in this panel, but yeah, keep that in mind. Graham, coming to you. In a more devolved system, how do you still preserve the coherence the rail industry needs, particularly around interoperability, whole system freight planning, and the national standards?
Good question. I think we have to go back to basics a little bit here as well. We have to really understand that 200 years ago, we invented railways to move passengers and freight. If we're going to go into a devolved world and we're going to talk about how does it get better for the future, I think we have to go back to some real proper basics of looking after passengers, looking after freight, touching on what Fiona said. One way to do that, to keep everything going, is the whole kind of common theme in there. Let's hark back to BR. None of us wear rose-tinted glasses, I think, from BR, but if you think about system thinking, from a BR perspective, it was all about the system and how it worked. So we have to think about what's the common threads, what's the real things that's underpinning it. You get into a devolved world, yes, you can do some really good things in innovation, you can do some really good things in cost saving, you can do some really good things in local things that's going on. But we have to have that joined up approach of we're putting the passenger first, we're putting freight first, and we're really looking after those core commodities. I say commodities, they're not, but that's the kind of theme of what you're looking at in there. So I think everything's great, devolution, absolutely, we need to get that competition in, we need to get those costs down, but we have to really get to the point of everybody understands what we're here for. We're here to deliver things, we're here to move people, we're here to move freight. That's the core thing that we're about.
And how do we keep the emphasis going through this?
I think there's a nice blend of what you have to do there in respect to the leadership of the whole railway and what it looks like. You need people who've been experienced enough to understand it, who've lived through it, who've done different things, who've got a bit of corporate memory on how you do things right and how things used to be and how you can bring it together. But you've absolutely got to bring innovation in there. You've got to bring new, clean, young thinking into this term as well. You start to bring those together, you start to a bit of coherence in respect to what you're thinking about. You talked about standards and rules and processes. They're never really going to change. They're the things that are core to safety on the railway. We tend to forget that because we are still the safest railway in Europe, if not the world. But what underpins all that is the fact that we run to a really standards-based railway. It's not perfect. I used to own loads of standards which were nonsense, but you've got to really think of the ones which are there to do the right thing. So you knit it together. You're trying to get the core underpinning, the core basics right. You can then start to look and deliver a really good service to people.
Yeah, it's really important getting basics right in this. Ross, the panel's mentioned a few times around innovation and scaling. We've got a SME audience listening to this in the room and online. They're going to want to know in a devolved world, how do we unlock faster scaled up innovation, particularly around you working with SMEs and early stage technologies? How do you see that panning out?
I think it's a huge opportunity, actually. So one of the things that we're doing with Future Labs in particular is, looking at how we can work collectively as train operators to provide the platform and for new entries into the rail industry and support them and provide that mentorship. But also, it provides the opportunity to scale. So, whereas maybe before, it was very fragmented. Let's put it out there. And from a supplier's perspective, you'd probably go to many different people across the industry to try and obtain a commercial contract. And actually, I think the real benefit for both the industry and the supply chain is that from our perspective as industry, you've got the economies of scale that you can get from procuring together, and from the supply chain, that opportunity of scale is there immediately. So if you have a solution that can work for the industry, actually the industry itself can buy it, and rather than just different pockets of it. And then finally, I think from a sort of local aspect, and one thing I'm really excited about is being able to tap into sort of local ecosystems, and I think that will come a lot more as things sort of take shape.
When I was thinking about this subject coming into today, I was wondering, the national scale allows you the scale to make things standardized and apply full scale, but with the local devolution, are we in danger of having too many patchwork pilots in the network? Will there be a tendency to do that, and how do we sort of overcome that to actually all the great stuff you just mentioned about applying the national scale to things? How do you manage that tension in innovation?
I think it's a good tension to have, but I think there needs to be coordination. So, like I say, tapping into those local ecosystems and supporting localities and startups and SMEs and companies in those devolved regions, and I think it's about testing in one area and obviously having the foresight to be able to go, well, let's make it work here, and let's collect the evidence that we need that will let us know that it's going to work everywhere, or at least maybe not everywhere, but in many other places as well.
Carrying on with this theme, Fiona, so from your perspectives, what does an effective partnership between a national strategy and local autonomy look like?
So I think actually picking up on Ross's point directly for some of that, so national strategies, as we've said, it's really important to bring that coherence, integration, standards, but I think also that point about how are we coordinating and how are we connecting up and not duplicating. So it's really strong that there are different centres doing different things and leaning into the expertise that they've got in region, but there is also that hard work nationally to do to bring that back together. We've been working recently in York and North Yorkshire as they develop a new, or bring shape to a really existing strength in rail, but build an innovation cluster around the York Central development, and that has involved really, really close and hard work to think about how are we distinctive to the other rail centres of excellence that are already here, and how are we linking in together so that we can be clear that we connect together. But if you want to do this, which is operational rail technologies in York, not in North Yorkshire, everyone, this is where you would come and do it. And actually we want to work with the other places. So I think that is really important. I think the other thing on the partnership is that it's about having those clarity on roles. And I think that the other thing that leans into is national does bring the scale, it brings the standard, but it's really at the local level where the economic value is unlocked, and that's really important to continue to put in mind. So our work on the Northern Economic Growth Corridor and in York and North Yorkshire is all about how are we doing complementary investment around rail, using rail and around rail to really leverage that investment, whether it is about housing density to lock that into where you've got passenger movement, if it's about industrial sites. Yesterday we heard about innovation districts. That's all a local level, really local level activity, and having those working together is really important.
So I have a slightly spicy follow-up question on that to test your theory. So imagine a scenario.
Spicy?
Well, we've got to find out in a second. Imagine a scenario where a local mayor wants 4 extra stops and affordable fares for his local region, but the national strategy is demanding fast services and maximum cost recovery. How do you settle the tiebreak?
Well, tell me a mayor that doesn't want that, and doesn't want its own direct fast connection to every other city across every other area. So yesterday, I was in the room next door and we talked about collaboration and where are we coordinating, where are we collaborating, and the other C word that I brought into that was compromise. So I think
conflict.
Conflict. There are plenty of other C words that we could choose.
Let's not go there.
It is compromise. It's not a binary choice. It can't be a tie break. Like the essence of working in partnership together is that we're working together, and that the point that we made yesterday was when you're collaborating, you don't always get everything that you want. But you have to find, if you're working in a full system, you have to find the way through that balances all of that. We want mayors making really strong cases for what works best for their place. We want systems that work, and we want the two to meet in the middle. And it's not always about everybody getting everything that they want, but about getting the right outcomes for the places that we're working in. So whether it's 4 stops an hour every hour of the day or certain hours of the day, is it about freight? I'm not the transport planners, you all are, but it is about what's the outcome that we need to achieve for this place at this time over this period, and how do we work together to get that?
No, I appreciate that. There's never going to be a straightforward answer to that question, but yeah. Ross, we just heard about collaboration, we've heard about compromise, we've heard of conflict. In a kind of devolved sort of industry going forward, how do we actually get that collaboration right? How do we get that collaboration landscape right?
I mean, we're doing it, right? I think there's wider collaboration as well. And as you've been talking, I've kind of been thinking about this a little bit more. And it's a collaboration beyond rail, right? Especially in those devolved regions. It's the opportunity to connect the local authorities and the transport authorities with our industry, which is historically worked at a national level. So there's a really big opportunity there to do that. And I think it's about creating those partnerships. So obviously through the Future Labs program that I run, you know, it's at a train operator level. It's not at the moment, it's not at a local government level or devolved government level. But the way I see it in the future, and how I sort of my vision for Future Labs, I guess, and you're getting a little glimpse into my mind a little bit, but is that you have those sort of clusters where everything's connected. You know, you're tapping into the ecosystems, you're shaping and executing local government policies whilst simultaneously, managing the tension between the national rail policies as well. And I think there is a really big opportunity for us as an industry and us as train operators, but I think just industry in totality, to work much closer with the local authorities to make, as you said, Fiona, deliver the outcomes that everyone wants, rather than trying to think of the exact things that we're all going to be doing. Actually, how you do it doesn't really matter, as long as we get to the outcomes that we want.
I know, Helen, your collaboration is a topic that's quite close to your heart as well. Any further thoughts on this? I mean, collaboration is seen as the magic bullet for the last 20, 30 years since I've been involved in the rail industry.
Yeah, and I've been talking at industry events for at least the last 6 years about the importance, and I'm not sure we've got it cracked. I think we approach it, in my opinion, we approach it in a perhaps less optimal way. I think actually we need to be thinking about the issues that the rail industry needs to solve, the things that cause the cost, that cause the disruption to passengers, and actually bringing together the supply chain and industry together to solve those. And I think what we end up doing, and I've worked with a lot of SMEs who work with Siemens, And one of the frustrations that they have is this kind of small pilot piece, right? Let's do a pilot in, I don't know, Croydon, East Croydon. We're going to prove our technology works, but there's absolutely no opportunity to scale. I think the larger suppliers such as Siemens can really help there, but I also think it's because we're not actually addressing the key problems. For me, Alan referred to two key problems when he was talking earlier on, I think, or opportunities, should I say. One's a problem, one's an opportunity. Weather is a massive problem for the rail industry, for the transport industry, but particularly the rail industry. It's massively impacting on safety, it's massively impacting on cost. And there are probably there are a number of suppliers in the industry who can play a part in fixing that problem nationally. And I don't think, by the way, that weather is a regional issue, because it's raining everywhere. It might rain slightly more in Manchester than it does in London, but weather is a national issue. And I think the other point that Alan referred to is stations. And I think that stations is a huge opportunity for improvement, and that the rail reform and an integrated policy or strategy can really help, because at the moment they're all completely fragmented. There's different levels of technology, different levels of passenger experience, different levels of support across stations across the UK, and actually that is unnecessary. So technology again can bring all of that together and really improve and make sure we've got a consistent passenger experience when they go and access those key transport hubs.
Excellent. I'm going to take a question from Slido. So we've got a well-being related question coming through. What safety do you have for driver fatigue and staff wellness? Who wants to answer that? What safety features, I'm guessing the question is, what safety features do you have for driver fatigue and staff wellness? Anybody?
Driver fatigue.
It's probably my domain. So, I mean, I think it's an interesting topic. We've looked at a number of potential areas. I mean, we worked with, through the Future Labs program, actually, a few years ago, we worked with a company who are spinning out some technology from UCL, I believe, for using voice to detect fatigue. It was very, very novel, very innovative. And again, I think really that failed in its application, and how you apply it. I think there's tension in this particular example. There's tension with drivers and driver unions into when you introduce new technologies. You have to be. It takes time, right? Yeah. You have to work with them from the very beginning. So yeah, there are. I believe there are a number of technologies that are being looked at. I don't know of any sort of ones that are other than the ones that we get in the cab as standard, if you like.
Yeah.
That have made it into the sort of mainstream.
So we're working at the moment on a replacement for what was Crew Plan, legacy system that most of the train operating companies work on. So the roster tool that we've got, it's quite infant, we're not really there, but we've started to play around with the fatigue space in that. So when we get a set of rosters, we run an AI, I had to say it, sorry, an AI tool through there that then looks at the validation of those rosters and starts thinking about, is that the optimum, is that right? There's a little bit of competence tied into that somewhere as well. It's not quite out there. We're working with a train operator at the moment to see where we go, but we're forecasting towards the middle of this year we'll have something which we can talk about that subject a little bit more mature, really. Sure. But it's something that we're thinking about it, listening to feedback, talking about what's going on there.
We'll stay tuned in. Question about rail fares. So if I'm a rail customer, two things I care most about is cost and reliability of service. ScotRail have recently abolished peak fares, for example. How do we see rail reform panning out in terms of, where does the rail customer, what are the benefits they're going to see as this, rail reform unfolds around fares? Well, anybody wants to take it.
I've been a big believer at GBR in that there's a couple of things GBR should have probably tackled early on. One is a timetable and one is fares. And you look at the LNER website and you look and you're buying fares now, it's much simpler, it's much easier, it's a lot easier to understand, and you can get where you need to get backwards and forwards. If I want to go from where I live in Northampton to Newcastle, it will cost me £253. If I go to Peterborough and drive across and get a train, it'll cost me £25.80. There's something fundamentally wrong with how the fare structure is set up in that process. And I think if we as an industry can really start to crack that fares, and I don't know what the solution is, do you pay per mile, do you pay per journey, do you pay per time, I don't know. But it can't possibly be wrong that I have to drive 3/4 of an hour to save myself over £200 to travel to see my team up in Newcastle. So if we as an industry are going to do something, we need to really crack that fares problem, that fares conundrum. You see many LinkedIn posts of it, walk on Manchester to London, £300, that's fine. You don't see that for LNER. Genuinely, I've never seen any comments around, I'm going to go get a train from Peterborough to London, or I'm going to get a train from York to London. It doesn't cost me £300 to do that. So you've kind of got something right. Let's take that and build on it as an industry and start to get that out there. We can't continue to charge silly fares for simple journeys.
Yeah.
I don't know if I answered your question, Vaibhav, but that's just a...
It's not an easy answer to provide on the topic. Let's increase the pace a little bit. I'm going to ask you guys some quick fire questions, and then I'm going to settle on a final question that I would like all you to chip into. So, some quick fire questions. Faster finger first, whoever wants to go. If you could steal one innovation from other sectors and drop into rail tomorrow, what would it be?
I don't think it's an innovation. I think it's the approach to innovation. I think it's pace, and I think a number of industries have really got innovation right. Let's learn from them how they do it.
Okay. What's the one thing that should stay consistent nationally as regions tailor arrangements locally?
Information to customers.
Okay.
Got to get that right. You've got to be consistent. I think you touched on it before. We have to get a common message that is simple, easy to understand. I spoke to somebody yesterday with person reduced mobility, and he was telling me some horrific stories of when he gets to stations and he cannot go left or right. He doesn't know which way to go. He stands on a platform. I don't know if the train's going to come in there or going to come in there. We have to get this all information system correct and sorted. Some places it's really good. Again, sorry, LNER. Your screens that do the sign language for people, fantastic. It's really good.
Very good.
But it's not consistent.
Information to customers, okay. If every region had its own super duper AI assistant, what's the first job the rail assistant would you ask it to do?
Deal with the weather, I think Helen would.
I mean, there's so many applications for AI in the rail industry. That's really hard. I think for me, really at a regional level, really understanding your travel requirements and the way that your communities move around your region. I think that's a real opportunity. At a national level, for me, it's going to be weather.
Interesting. Yeah, I would say that it's on a creating that personalised sort of travel rep, for the passenger. So it knows everything that you're doing. It knows your itinerary. It knows but it's also integrated with the transport sector. So it knows information before it happens. It can rebook your train ticket if it's if something's been cancelled or delayed. It does as much for you as possible.
Sounds like a brilliant idea. There's some innovators out there that might be.
Crack on.
How about getting it to look at timetables for freight?
You stole it from me.
Sorry.
No, I'll build it, Google.
So freight gets put into loops because they're seen as being slow and heavy and can't compete with passenger services. But when you really unpeel that, you're talking about schedules that are based on old running times and old locomotives. And actually, if you keep a 2,000-ton train going, it's probably going to get there better and maybe not stop the train behind. You might get yellow signals, but it's going to keep both of them moving. An AI agent could probably do something to validate some freight schedules and timetables for us.
No, it's complimentary, don't worry, it's great teamwork. I think it comes back to that question about how do you help everyone in the partnership understand. So I think, like, if we're thinking about the kind of the digital twin and the modelling, actually doing something that brings to the surface all of the movement that you can see and that you need to think about when you're balancing that, so that you could put in front of the mayor some real choices about impact modelling. Well, if you did do this, this is what would happen. Like, you're going to have to, what outcome is it that you're trying to prioritise here, so that we can make a decision about what we do. I think if you could get an AI assistant or a digital twin to do that would be great.
A final question to all of you, and cast ourselves 10 years ahead. Rail reform's been a roaring success. What are the fundamental successes we're going to see that they're going to be visibly different to today? And secondly, second part of the question is, what's the one step we can all do to enable that journey?
I'll go first, because otherwise you'll steal my answers probably. So for me, I think sort of success of this looks like, where you've got clusters of innovation happening, almost churning out innovation which gets scaled. I think that's kind of what we've just been talking about. And you can quite clearly see that path to production, that path to scale. And there's a very strong methodology behind it and process. I forget the second part of your question.
Doesn't matter. So what's the first step we would all need to
take? First step, yes. I think connect. I think we all need to start connecting a bit more. Collaborating is probably. Yeah, sorry, I added a new C word in, didn't I?
Yeah. And probably it's the same answer for all of us. For me, it is actually a whole industry working together to really drive and with those tangible results. And it being more efficient, using better technology, costing less, having more money to spend on doing new things.
I think there's something about innovation and connected transport as well. If you go 10 years to the future, you can get up in the morning, you can get a bus, you can get to the train station, you can get to the tube, you can come back from work on the tube, on the train, on the bus. All the information's there, everything works seamlessly for the passengers. That's the way I look at it, where we are.
Final word, Fiona.
Amazing, that's exciting. I would have said getting the SME pathways clearer for adoption, but I think instead I'm going to come back to where I started and be like, if this has all worked really well, we'll be as fluent in talking about freight movement and industrial movement as we are about passenger movement, and that when we arrive to talk to economic development teams in combined authorities or strategic authorities, they actually have both of those things as a talking point, not just, it's really important human movement, but they're also thinking at the same time about their freight and industry movement too.
Well, thank you very much, panel. You've been a great panel, and it's been a lovely discussion to be had. I've thoroughly enjoyed myself. Please give a big round of applause for our panel.